welcome to today's session. Thank you for joining us for this edition of Around the Water Cooler. Today's session is all about unravelling hybrid cloud, data, analytics and compliance challenges. To tackle that particular subject, I've got three panelists who know a huge amount more than I do. So first of all, I'll ask you all to introduce yourselves. If we can keep it brief, we've only got about 20 minutes for today's discussion. But first of all, Alex, could you tell us who you are and what you do?
I run a team of cloud solution architects within the Global Alliance division of Dell Technologies. We essentially build and architect solutions for our major alliance partners, primarily within the European theatre.
Great, thank you. Ant, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself next, that'd be wonderful.
Yeah, hi there everyone. My name's Anton Phillips. I am the CTO at D4T4 Solutions. We as a company build and manage data platforms for a whole range of customers, hybrid cloud, and we also have a range of data platform products which we offer for marketing, fraud, and also risk analysis.
And last but certainly not least, Alastair, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself.
Yes, I'm CIO from the Research Data Scotland, Alyssa, Rennie, sorry, I should have said my name. My responsibilities cover the management and establishment of data access platforms for public data in Scotland. Responsibilities cover information governance, information security, and system selection and delivery.
Thank you all. Look, we're going to come, I think, to Ant for this first question, because I think your experience with D4T4 and working with your customers is going to be kind of invaluable here. Because over the last 18 months, undoubtedly, we've seen added complexity in many environments. And as we move forward, what do you think the best of breed solutions are, from your perspective, that customers are looking for?
Yeah, so it's a good question. I think we've seen a real seminal shift in the last 18 months, 2 years amongst our customer base. And it's a lot more than just simply putting something glib out there like we're just moving to the cloud. We've seen customers moving, of course, to those cloud-first data platforms, Snowflake, as an obvious example. But one of the really important shifts we've seen beyond that is much more about more use cases for the data rather than just more data. So, for example, we're seeing customers who want to do real-time activation of their data, and perhaps they want to put that into a Kafka data stream or Kinesis, something like that. Perhaps they also want to use that same data to build machine learning models, to do some predictive use case like detecting churn. And all of that is sort of underpinned by the platforms they choose. So a lot of our customers really like GCP, Google, because it's a kind of market leader in that area around AI. So we see data going in there, and then other data for these other use cases, perhaps for more application uses, goes into AWS, which is more of a leader in that space. And it creates this tremendously complex environment where you've got data being fed into lots of different environments, not simply just on-prem and cloud, but multiple clouds. And of course, compliance, which is perhaps something we'll come to later on, has to underpin all of that. And that is really tremendously challenging for a lot of these enterprises.
I suppose it would be remiss not to kind of turn to you, Alastair, as a CIO. You know, we're talking to D4T4 there. They're obviously giving us that broader view of the market. You're a customer. What Ant is saying, I would hope, kind of tallies with what your own experience is and what you're looking for as a CIO.
Absolutely. In terms of particularly the hybrid environments, we're looking at real challenges around trying to access data in terrestrial and in cloud platforms. And when you then look at bridging across multiple cloud platforms, you open up both the technical challenges as well as the compliance and security challenges. So that adds complexity, and it becomes almost factored up rather than just a straight linear, add one more cloud isn't just twice as much complexity. It factors it up almost by a scale of exponential magnitude, because it really is challenging then looking at all of the interrelationships between each of the cloud platforms and the terrestrial platforms as you try to move forward.
So Alex, listening there to those two answers, and in particular, again, if I turn back to Ant, because he talked about real-time data and he talked about machine learning, there's obvious desire there to unlock value from the applications. And that's got to place demand on infrastructure, which I imagine is not necessarily what a solutions architect necessarily wants to hear. But what are the challenges that are being faced when you're considering accessibility and storage of the data that you're creating?
Yeah, I think Ant summed it up really well. Part of the challenge we have right now is that applications are no longer in one location. So you have multiple applications running in multiple different clouds, in both on-premise and off-premise, in public cloud, and frequently at the edge, and increasingly so over the next few years. And managing the data across all those applications is becoming ever more complex. But it's not just managing the data in those locations. It's also how do you make that data accessible to to all of the other applications that need to be able to use it and make it useful and able to be analyzed anywhere you need it. So increasingly, we're seeing organizations start to look for solutions where data is held away from the application. So we have, for example, solutions where we have storage placed outside of the cloud, but accessible to the cloud. Natively accessible to the cloud, which means any application can use it, and it's portable. So you don't get into all of the problems around cloud egress charges and all of those things that become a real financial consideration when you start looking at data in multiple locations. The other area that I think really is starting to become more of a focus area for us is the need to deal with the ever increasing volume of data. So the rate at which data doubles is increasing dramatically. We're producing more data than ever. It all has value, but we need to make some intelligent decisions around what do you analyze at the source and bring back intelligent insights from, what do you retain for the long term, and where do you retain it? So is it on primary storage or on a cold archive storage, for example?
That does raise one quick question, and I know it's kind of secondary topic to the overall title of this discussion. But if we've got an ever increasing volume of data, and storing that data takes energy, it's remiss of us not to touch very quickly on sustainability and just ask the question of whether or not that is something that you are being asked, or whether or not it's a question that is being pushed elsewhere.
Yeah, I'll happily answer that as well. So I think, yeah, we're being asked every day. So almost every customer engagement that we come to, if we're responding to a tender, they all have elements of questions around sustainability, and Dell's very open about our sustainability policy globally. We have a ton of material published and some pretty ambitious goals around what we want to achieve by our 2030 is the next major milestone that we've set for ourselves as an organization. We also demand a lot from a sustainability perspective from our partners. Yeah. And I'll give you one example. We are partnering with Equinix from a data center perspective. Those guys also have some pretty ambitious goals out there. And I think they're already consuming 90% of their data center power from renewable sources, right? These things matter, and it's not a question of it's not a question of having to do it. It's a question of something we should all want to do, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And sorry, you can jump in.
Yeah, this is a really interesting topic for me. Sustainability, for me, is such a broad topic anyway, but we have a little different perspective on sustainability, which is less around the sort of climate change, data, cooling, energy type of thinking, and more around the sustainability of the relationship that our customers, our businesses we work with, have with their customers, that relationship, and how to sustain that, because it's being constantly undermined between the steady stream of data breaches that we see and these scandals like Facebook and Cambridge Analytica. And for us, what we see amongst our customers is that that's creating a real difficulty, because the response to all of that is regulation. We're seeing regulations coming everywhere throughout the world, whether it's GDPR or in California with CPRA. There's now this sort of patchwork quilt of regulations throughout the world who our customers have to deal with. And that is absolutely unsustainable. It's creating such a complex environment to work in that really needs to coalesce, I think, around a smaller set of regulations which businesses can deal with. It's just too complex and too costly at the moment.
We might well come back to, I suppose, to regulation in a bit more detail. But let's pick up on that theme of scandal for the time being, and I'll stick with you, Ant. If we're talking about increasing numbers of people working from home, I happen to be in the office today, but I'm very much in the minority for that. If I look across the office, there's barely 30 people on the floor of 210 normally prior to the pandemic. So increasing numbers of people in remote environments. That's almost created a secondary pandemic, I suppose, of fraud and attacks. How are organisations protecting their IP in this new environment?
Yeah, you're right in that way of putting it. I think it is a second sort of pandemic. It's the numbers are just staggering. I think in the first half of this year, UK Finance reported something like 350 million fraud losses just from the UK alone. So that's this new wave of scams, which I'm sure we've all seen. Either it's an email purporting to be from our CEO, that kind of CEO scam needing to transfer some money at short notice, or it's text messages from a delivery company. The numbers are just horrendous, and as a consequence of that, pretty much every company, because these days the vast majority of companies are also financial services companies, so there are losses to be incurred. As a consequence of that, companies need to protect themselves, and there's lots of ways of doing that. Ultimately, I think it comes down to data, being able to use data through these sorts of fraud data platforms, because the key characteristics of these things are being able to do it in real time. I think in yesteryear, we would look at fraud prevention as something as a sort of analytical workload you do after the fact, a bit like sort of money laundering. But nowadays, to detect and prevent these more widespread scams and similar fraud, it has to be real time. And also, it has to be able to evolve very quickly, because these fraudsters are absolutely genius. They are brilliant businessmen, if you look at them that way. They find a weakness, they find a vulnerability, and they scale up extraordinarily quickly. And therefore, the defenses need to be able to detect those sorts of evolving threats and react in real time. That I think is the crunch of it.
Alex, sorry, you're a consult.
Yeah, I completely agree with Ant on this. We're seeing, statistics tell us that we're seeing a new cyber attack around every 11 seconds, right? So globally, that's not, and the average cost of those attacks is rising. We're looking, last time I looked at the numbers, it was averaging around $13 million per attack. Right? And that's from mainly a ransomware perspective. So where Ant's talking about financial fraud, we're seeing tons of ransomware attacks coming into play, and they can cripple a business overnight. Right? So there's a huge amount of focus on it. It's very, very high up on most IT decision makers' agenda. Right?
I think this next question should again go to Alastair first, but I think Ant and Alex, you may well have a view on it both as well. We're talking there about, evolving attacks. We're talking about the fact that there's an attack every 11 seconds globally. Originally, I put, if you are the victim of an attack. Maybe it should be when you are the victim of an attack. How do you get back to business as usual as quickly as possible? As a CIO, what do you think are the steps you need to take?
I think the basic one for this one, David, is planning. You have to plan. You have to plan and rehearse. You have to think through what are the potential vectors for attack and plan to both counter those and to recover from them. So you're right, the when is one of the things that is going to occur. So when last year, when I was doing a little bit of planning with a new company, I sat the team down and said, right, we've just had a data breach. We're just going to do a scenario planning exercise to see how we're going to recover from this. What are you going to do, guys? And my CTO said to me, another one. And I went, oh, and he said, yes, last year we had an attack, a cyber attack, and we lost a whole lot of access to data. So my question at that point was, well, what did you do? Well, we had to phone a lot of people and find out what we should do. And that was because they didn't have a plan in place. So for me, having been working on the establishment of Research Data Scotland, we've put together our cyber defence planning as part of our business continuity planning. And it has to be business continuity planning as well as cyber defence planning, because if you get hit and you lose systems, what are your guys going to be doing? They have to have something to do. You have to have a way of making sure that you can keep productivity up. Otherwise, your business just stops dead in the water. And that has happened with a number of organizations recently. So planning, contingency, making sure that your data is safe, that you have recoverable ways of getting data back. And that's the old grandfather, father, son type of backups, of making sure that you've got a long enough string back. One of the attacks that I was talking to a colleague about fairly recently was they reckoned that they had been attacked 4 months earlier, and that the seeds for that cyber attack was so far back in the distance that it was out with their backup window. So they lost everything. They had no way of restoring or recovering. So think about that way. How far back should I be going? I should probably be going back a year to hold data, to hold systems, not just data. It's about making sure you hold the systems as well, that we actually have all of systems configuration, access, profiling, etc. All of that has to be restorable as well. So it's how do we get back to working as a company? It's plan, rehearse, review, rehearse, review, and keep that cycle going.
Alex, I know that you're keen to perhaps build on the point of Alastair's. I would also ask if you, and then perhaps Anton afterwards, could also give maybe one insight around what you would suggest to people from your experience, where, one piece of advice to get back to business as usual.
Yeah, absolutely. So to give some context to Alastair's, what Alastair was saying, which I wholeheartedly agree with, the average time that we see for people to identify and contain an attack is around 280 days. That's roughly the amount of time that people are in the network before they activate, whatever they're going to do, right? So as you said, Alastair, looking how far back you have to go in your data to recover is really, really important, because it's not a case of rolling back to yesterday's backup. Yeah. And it's only a disruption if you don't have a plan, right? So as long as you've done your planning up front, there's plenty of frameworks out there. NIST is probably the most frequently cited one, right? But the other thing that we're seeing, and it's a conversation going on with almost all our customers right now, is people looking to implement a cyber vault. So this is an air-gapped recovery platform that allows you to take your most critical data and put it effectively in a cyber safe away from your production environment, so that if you do get attacked, you have a gold standard copy that's known and proven to be good and easy to recover from, to make sure that you can run those business continuity plans without having to take a gamble on the backups.
And Ant, would you offer one kind of insight around this?
Yeah, so we rely very heavily on ISO 27001, which I can tell you is not glamorous at all, and it's pretty time consuming, but we find that a really very valuable framework to think about InfoSec and all the management around that, to make sure the right processes are in place. To all the things that Alastair said actually around business continuity, disaster recovery, and so on. It's not the only one out there, but that's one which we've found to be really very helpful to us. There's more practical ones which we also get involved with from time to time. We deal with healthcare customers in the US, so we often work around HIPAA. There's some in the UK like Cyber Essentials Plus. So there are more sort of cyber oriented practical things, but from an overall framework of making us think about and do the right things, then ISO 27001 and its siblings has been really helpful to us.
I would say, sorry, David, I would say also use the cybersecurity information available from NCSC, because there is a huge amount of guidance and support. There's toolboxes on there for helping you analyze your position, etc. There's so much information available free of charge from them and from other organizations to help you understand your risks. They may not help you implement the mitigation that you require, and you may need to go to other professional services to do that, but at least they'll help you understand what your position is.
Sorry.
Yeah, one more thing, one more observation on this same topic. Something we've seen in the last 6 or 9 months, as we're moving environments into cloud, into AWS, we're starting to see researchers popping up, getting in touch with us unprompted to warn us of upcoming vulnerabilities. We've never seen that before, and that sort of transparency is really helpful. I mean, we do our best to stay on top of all these sorts of things, but the more eyes, I think, which are out there looking to look for vulnerabilities in systems really gives us advance warning. So that's a new trend that we've just seen coming.
So we're beginning to run short on time, and I've got one last question. So perhaps we can approach this quite succinctly and do a quick round robin from all of you. And I'm sorry to condense this down, but Ant talked a little bit about regulation earlier and how it might not be fit for purpose. Planning itself has been condensed from years down to months. So with that in mind, and if I start with you, Alastair, what privacy and regulation hurdles do you think need greater attention?
You need to comply, obviously, with UK GDPR. There is a mandatory requirement for that, and that requires understanding and knowledge. If you don't have it in-house, get it. You need to be able to understand what your limitations are and what they're going to be. The same with the regulatory, so whether you've got FCA compliance or other compliance requirements. Unfortunately, these change all the time. ICO guidance is changing all the time. UK GDPR regulations are changing all the time. FCO guidance is changing all the time. So we need to be on top of this, and very few of us are actually in that game long enough to be able to have that level of understanding. So you do need to go to the professionals in many cases and use their expertise to help you, particularly when we've shortened the timeframes. You don't have time to consider all of the risks and impacts yourself. You need to engage people to help you do that. And those are the key things you need to do. Get those risks and impacts under control.
Alex, if I jump to you next, sorry, I know that it means that you're going to be last and having to think of something that's not already been said. But Alex,
I'll be very, very brief. Right? So there's two things that really spring to mind, which are areas that if the regulation is not already there right now, it's coming reasonably quickly. So the first one, we talked a lot about cybersecurity, and I think operational resilience is becoming a key topic among regulators. The second one is we will start to see increased regulation, or not in regulation, but requirements around sustainability, and particularly with the rapidly evolving conversations around climate change.
And a final word from yourself.
Yeah, two things for me. I think the first is around whatever kind of data platforms your organization uses, whether it's customer data platforms in marketing or fraud data platforms, make sure that they have a regulatory or compliant underpinning, a strong underpinning. Putting that in afterwards is nigh on impossible. And I think that really feeds into the sort of vendor selection process that we all go through. And the only other thing I think is to think about automation. So having a team of folks who, when you get a right to be forgotten request from a GDPR type thinking, have to go around 40 or 50 different systems trying to erase personal information, that's just not viable, that's just not sustainable. So being able to automate this is really important as well, I think.
Look, thank you all of you for your time this afternoon. Thanks, Ant, Alastair and Alex for joining us. If you've enjoyed today's episode of Around the Water Cooler, please stay, have a look at the CIO Water Cooler website. There's plenty more of these sessions and the one-on-one CIO Water Cooler TV episode.